That out. I think I got my novice license in 1959. So, and I think I upgraded in 1962. So, at any rate, yeah, I've been in D-Star for real for about 6 years, six or seven. So today I'm talking about my favorite devices, and if one of my favorites is something I sell, okay, I'll mention it, but that's not why I'm doing this. And I'm not doing a survey, so if I don't mention your favorite, I apologize. So here's the first category of extensions, and most of you are familiar with where you can have a QSL with somebody on a D-Star reflector or repeater, and you don't have a D-Star radio yet. It's a great way to find out if you're going to like D-Star. It basically it uses, the first one was the DV dongle, the blue dongle, and from Internet Labs, Robin and Mo created that. And plugs into a PC of any kind, and the software will work over the internet to connect to these conference servers, and you can have QSOs using the PC speaker and microphone. No radio needed, and it's a great way to get started. So I've had a lot of fun with the DV dongle, and I've done a lot of things with it, not just to do this sort of thing, but it's a great device, and the new DV3K is very nicely done. I don't have one of those, but I'm betting it's good. Certainly the DV dongle is. The next favorite thing, and you know how to order these things, I don't know. I think I'm kind of doing them chronologically, but from DV, from Northwest Digital Radio, this really, I love this little thing, and I gotta kind of tell a story here. What I like about it is, it's really well designed. It works, just flat out works. It's got a good price, and I love the little case. It's clear plastic, and maybe nobody here will relate to this, but when my wife and I would be looking for a new dishwasher, you know, the store would have one of those with a demo, and it would have clear plastic in the front so you could see it operating. And so she always wants to buy the washer with the clear plastic in the front, and that's kind of the way I feel. So anyway, I think, but it works. It's great support from Northwest Digital and Yahoo groups and so forth. So that's another one of my favorites, and I do own it, and I have used it, and use it. So even though this third one is the Star DV, which was designed by a guy by the name of Rick. 80 OSS in Iowa, and Matrix Circuits makes the product. And the only thing different from the DV3K and the Thumb DV, well, the main thing that's different is that it has an onboard codec and a place to plug in a speaker mic. So if you don't want to dedicate a sound card, or you don't want to use a headset with a sound setup, you can use it, for example, on a Raspberry Pi or something. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that if you have the right software, some people have actually adapted analog radios to use with D-Star QSOs. Now, you need one of these AMBE devices, and then you also need some sort of a modem. And then you need the right software. So I really don't want to give the impression that if you do this, you will end up with a D-Star radio. I don't think that would be fair. But you can have D-Star QSOs using an analog radio, and people do. And if you have the right software, you can do it on HF. I have a 7100, which I generally love, but I have adapted my TS2000 to do HF D-Star. And so it can be done, but I don't want to mislead. It's a do-it-yourself project. It's not just plug and play. It's not hard, but it's just not good. Anyway, so what I'm going to first talk about then is another category of my favorite third-party extensions, and these are really about hotspots. And most of you, it's interesting, the many different industries use the term hotspot for their own little world. So the cell carriers have cell phone hotspots that they sell you. And Wi-Fi, routers and things, there'll be Wi-Fi hotspots to extend Wi-Fi. I travel with one of those all the time. What we're talking about, a D-Star hotspot, is something which will work with software and internet and radio to create, like, as I like to say it, and I will say on the next slide, extends the D-Star network to your neighborhood. If the little analog radio is running 10 watts, it could run 20 or 40, I suppose, as long as you have cooling. But it gives, you can have pretty good coverage. A friend of mine, in 2011, 2010 somewhere, put up one of these things here. It was in a town that didn't have a D-Star repeater, so he put this up, and he could drive around town with his D-Star radio and hit his home antenna and his home hotspot and be talking to people anywhere in the world on D-Star reflectors. And this is an older slide I've repurposed, and so the modem does not have to be a GMSK modem. There are some wonderful other technology modems that I'll talk a little bit about, but digital signal processing type modems. So basically what this should say is a D-Star radio, an analog radio, a modem, software, internet. That's what you need for a hotspot. So here's some of my favorite. And just before I launch into that, I should add in the point that you can use a modem with either a single analog radio or two of them. If you use two, you can build yourself a D-Star garage repeater. You still have to follow all the rules. You're going to want a duplexer, but you can create a full duplex D-Star compatible repeater. And there's enough, the radio could be any frequency. So most people use 2 meters, 440, 70 centimeters, but of course you could use 220 megahertz. So I kind of think with the Kenwood new radio that has 3 bands, one of them is 220 megahertz coming out, that people are going to be starting to create homebrew D-Star compatible repeaters on 220. And it's also possible, with using the same technology, to interface with the ICOM repeater controller up to C in such a way that to the repeater controller, your homebrew hotspot on 220 megahertz looks like just another module. So you could then have a true full stack ICOM repeater where one of the bands was 220. So I kind of see a growth in homebrew repeaters just because of this new Kenwood radio. Well, anyway, my favorite modems. I got to mention Satoshi Yasuda. He was on the committee that created the Japan Amateur Radio League D-Star RF spec. And he just felt like there needed to be a way for people to be able to do their own D-Star projects. So it was really, this whole third-party do-it-yourself theme was really started by Satoshi. And I have used his, I've used one from Mark Phillips and Fred Van Kempen. To be real honest, Fred's kind of a friend, and my favorite in that class was the HSA modem, which he never sold. I had a prototype that he never brought to market. But in that world, that was one of my, the Starboard is the one that I sell, so obviously it's going to be my favorite. But I do use it all the time. I've had a Starboard, I call it my production hotspot, that's been running continuously 24/7, 365 since 2011. I bring it down to update either the little Linux operating system or the latest software. And then the other one, I have to admit here, I have another DV Mega product which I am so impressed with that I have decided to put DV Mega GMSK modem shield on this list also, even though I don't currently have one. I'm sure I'll get one. This particular idea was it fits on an Arduino, which then it runs the firmware that host has written. And I think the DV Mega products are really first class. So I just felt comfortable putting this on my list. So I've just talked about high power, medium power, whatever you want, but hotspots that extend the ability to get to D-star reflectors and repeaters, more than just within a block of your house. They'll extend it out. Mine gets out about 5 miles because I have a low-line antenna, although where I live, I can drive up into the hills and from 20 miles away I can see down and hit my hotspot. So the point is, this class of project gives you some pretty good coverage if the antenna situation is right. The next class is very similar, but it's I didn't finish. I'm moving on, but the other one is, instead of a GMSK modem, my other favorite is a DSP modem. And by far and away, in that class, my favorite is a DV repeater version 1. They're sold by Bruce Given in Canada, dvrptr.net, and the V1 is, the firmware is written by Jan Alta, a German engineer who is co-designer of this. And he split up from that team. That team has done some other things I'll talk about. But this is, of the DSP class, this is the only one that I have played with, so that's the only one I listed. I just haven't had time to look at the other versions, which are the V2, V3. But I can honestly attest that DV repeater version 1 is a great modem. And if I weren't selling my Star DV modem, I would personally buy this modem. Well, I did anyway. I did personally buy it, so I have one. Okay, now we're going to talk about, instead of these bigger coverage, low power hotspots. And the category was invented by Robin and Mo and Internet Labs. They call it an access point DVAP, and most of you know what it is. It's well designed, well constructed, good software from them. You can also use other people's software, and great support. So that's got to be on my list. And then in this category, DV Mega is you can get it in one of two forms. The one I have is a RF board shield that sits on a Arduino. It's just Arduino's a little microprocessor with a chip on there, and firmware sits in there. So it seems complicated, but it's not. After you put the DV Mega RF board onto the Arduino, you think of it as one thing. Put quotes around. It's like a DVAP. And the other one that he makes is an actual RPI radio. In other words, it's got the equivalent of the microprocessor that would be on an Arduino Uno. It's got that right on the board. And so the whole board then plugs into a Pi. Makes it really easy to create this little thing. What it is, it's got, I don't know if it's 10 milliwatts, but it's a low power RF transceiver. And it really works well. I just love this product, and it was so easy to get going, and it worked the first time for me anyway. And so I cannot say enough about that product that I have, the DV Mega RF board shield. And here's another one. If I can only have one piece of third-party gear, this is probably the one I'd have. Now there's another category entirely that kind of does the same things I was just talking about, but the previous things I've talked about were just D-Star, and which for me is fine. But there's a new growing thing that you'll be hearing about as soon as I stepped down here about multi-mode, and I'm really impressed with what's going on here. And I have a DV4 Mini, many of you have heard of it, and I got mine from Uli down at Wireless Holdings in Florida, created by this German team. I think they call it themselves the digital team. Again, it's low power. It looks like a thumb drive. So I better try something else. It looks like a USB memory stick, but it's got this little stuff on board, a little transceiver and firmware to make it work. Now, it will support, with this proper software, DStar, DMR, Fusion. I misspelled the Fusion in P25. As it is now, at least when I last used it, it changes weekly. The software keeps getting enhanced, but you decide what mode you want to be, and then you're in that mode. The software is able to link to a new style of reflector that does DMR, and also fusion rooms. Not the same ones that, if you're used to DMR Mark, not the same talk groups that the DMR network has, but or not the same fusion rooms that Nancy has set up. But it does work, and it's a good first step. I think the software is where the hardware, I think, is there, but the software is going to keep getting enhanced. DV Mega that I've already talked about, it turns out, can be loaded with multi-mode firmware, and it's supported by G4KLX, which many of you are familiar with as a third-party software. And so I think this multi-mode is just taken off, and finally, maybe the most impressive in the long run for people like me is MMDVM, which Jonathan Naylor, G4KLX, who's the author of a lot of popular third-party software for DStar, has kind of proposed this design. And then Jim, KI6ZUM, who, by the way, is sitting in the booth with DV Mega. Anyway, Jim did the layout, the design of the board itself. Prototypes are available from Bruce, and I think it's really right now for true tinkerers. I would not ask people who have never done a do-it-yourself project in let's say digital voice to jump in there right now. If some of you have ever seen my website, I have a website where it's kind of a how-to set up a hotspot or how to do this or that, and I'm not ready to write that how-to for this world yet, but it's getting close. So it's fun, but you better be a tinkerer. But I have one of the prototypes. I'm going to be ordering the new prototype that will be coming out, and I'm going to be staying real close touch. And the idea here is, you want to talk to somebody on DMR, you pick up your DMR radio. You want to talk to somebody on DStar, you pick up your DStar radio, but your hotspot, if you will, is working with this special modem through an analog radio and the internet. I'm in favor of all digital voice modes, so I've got nothing bad to say about DMR, Fusion, and so forth. I'm just glad that we're finding ways to have us all mixed together. Now, here's I guess the other topic I wanted to briefly talk about. And it's not something, unless you are a repeater, trustee, or owner, that you can do, but you can plant a seed. We know DStar lets users kind of do what they want. And most admins, like I am the admin for the W6CX DStar gateway, most admins allow users through RF to issue an unlink command. So if you're normally linked to reflector 30 Charlie, your repeater is, and the repeater is not busy, you can just set out an unlink command from your radio and then link to somewhere else. Maybe you want to link to reflector 12 alpha in Southern California or all over. And to be real honest, most of the really fun reflectors I go on are D+ reflectors that start, the name is REF something, something, something. But a lot of people who are going to the new kind of reflectors, XRF, DCS, and so forth, maybe they can do it if they have their own little DVAP and the proper software to do that, but they can't use their club's repeater for this. And so, since the fun is the network, what we decided to do was to add some capabilities to our ICOM repeater there in Northern California. And so now our users of our ICOM repeater can also not only link to reflectors, REF reflectors, but also XRF reflectors and DCS reflectors. And then just for fun, the software we're using supports a new kind of call sign routing. I have a question. If you get a new D-Star radio, and if you actually take the time to go through the manual, I want to ask this. The question is about call sign routing and that section of the manual. How many people have used call sign routing? Well, that's really good. I'd say that's 20% at least. That's really good. I found call sign routing, one of the reasons I always tell people if they're new to D-Star and they want to know what's good about it, it's the first thing I tell them about. And then what I discovered was for myself, I stumbled making that work. I have, but I just find the recipient of the call sign routed call having to push a button and stuff, I just didn't like it. So maybe it's just I didn't like the manuals. And maybe that's all it's needed. But anyway, CCS7 is an improved, in my opinion, call sign routing system. You need a little number to fill into a database, so that my number 1234567 translates to K63M. So if you want to get me, you actually ask for 1234567, and then the system will say, oh, well, that guy was last heard on such and such a repeater, and the person's call will be routed to the repeater in his area. And so it's an easier call sign routing. So here's our repeater in Northern California, and we have people who like DCS 6B or something. And so they can unlink from a normal RF repeater. They can link to this DCS reflector, and the same with XRF. And there's a whole bunch of new XRF reflectors coming online now. It's a big growth area, especially with some new software out there. So bottom line is, those new kinds of reflectors are fun, new kinds of linking, and then CCS7 is fun because, I'll give you a good example. I have a friend in Southern California. He doesn't know that I'm not home, but he just does a CCS7 call sign route to my call sign. Usually, the last heard is my hotspot at home, and it just comes out on my radio there. But no, I'm driving around, and I've been talking on the local repeater, and so it routes through our local repeater. It's an ICOM repeater. It routes through. I quickly unlink from our default reflector, just so they don't hear all this us talking, and I chat with him. So he finds me wherever I am, and to me, I think it's great. So now ICOM repeaters can do that too, and I've already said this, but if you're the admin, you can do it. If you're the user, you can ask people, is this possible? I'm not saying a lot of admins just won't want to do it, but it's possible. There's two ways to do it. The first way was documented some time ago on John Hayes' blog, and he just pointed out that if your ICOM repeater is a member of the U.S. Trust, and you can stay a member of the U.S. Trust, you can just shut down the G2 gateway software from ICOM and instead, but leave the registration page running, and then instead run the G4KLX program called IRC DDB Gateway. And it supports all this linking stuff I just talked about. And it works, and the big pro is it's easy, and multiple reflector handling is all integrated. So there's no question about that. It's a great way to go. You are no longer a genuine D+ gateway, so the repeater is a little bit harder for some people to link to if they want to link to the repeater. Now, not many people link directly to repeaters, as you know. Most people link to the reflectors that are typically associated with some repeater they're interested in. So this is one way. And the other way is we run both ICOM G2 with genuine D+, and the G4KLX gateway. The trick is that, ICOM G2 does all the normal stuff, including ICOM call sign routing, but genuine D+, Robin's D+, handles links to the REF reflectors, and then the other program, IRC DDB Gateway, handles DCS, XRF, CCS7. So we also run monlink, so we always have a default REF reflector. Now, I'm not going to go into technically how we did it. I really wasn't able to get it done myself, and I got help from Adrian, and he works tirelessly. He's in, many of you have heard Adrian on the air, VK4TUX, and he lives in Australia, and when he agreed to do this, he was working long hours. When we were done, the club was so happy that we actually donated some money to him just because of his time. He didn't ask us, but we were very pleased. So the way it works is, let's say I'm driving around, our default reflector is reflector 14 Charlie, so I just pick up my radio, I switch to a memory to say unlink, and you can do that using a UR call memory or a DR node. And then if I want to link to an XRF reflector or DCS, I just issue a UR call such as XRF005B, L, that's the format of that little thing. I'm not going to go into the details, but the bottom line is it's easy enough to program your radio, to ask the ICOM repeater, ask the IRC DDB Gateway program to do the link to this other reflector system. And you can also use DTMF code tones if your D-Star radio supports them. CCS7, same thing. You can get out of the current link. You can either do a DTMF code or a 7-digit format. I won't go into that. I guess you just put a C and then the 7 digits in the UR call. And bingo, you're being routed. And behind the scenes, Adrian had it set up so that we asked monlink to please be quiet. If we're having one of these CCS call sign routed things, we will not have monlink keep that reflector, default reflector going. We'll just keep that all quiet until the QSO is done. So all of that stuff works really well. And I guess what I'm saying is, it's easy to do the projects I talked about, and you're going to be hearing more about in a second of some other ones. But my plea to you is, do projects yourself. It's fun to buy the radios, and we're not going to be designing those too often ourselves, but we can add on and we can extend D-Star and have a lot of fun. So I used to say this is the golden age of D-Star, and I'm now kind of changing that to say this is the golden age of digital voice. And I really think that the amount of change going on right now is enormous, and it just means this digital voice is caught on, and I'm glad to be part of it. Any questions? Very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. Jim is kind of modest, and saying he's not one of the DSTAR pioneers, but this type of experimentation, there are a few people doing that, including our next speaker here. It's interesting. I kind of recall in the early days of DSTAR, when it was really just about the only digital mode out there that really took any traction in amateur radio. You still had some early people really that I'll call the pioneers that were really experimenting out there and developing. I really don't think DSTAR would have developed without some of these third-party devices that came into play in the early days, and I think that has really helped it grow. Now, just like anything in amateur radio, and I mentioned this morning in the class, someone asked me the difference between G2 and IRC-DDB, and someone said, "Oh, I want to hear him explain this." Just like in any new thing that comes along in amateur radio, the good and the bad is someone says, I'd like to do it a little differently. I think I can either do it better, or I just want to do it differently. And I think that's what happened, or has happened, and continues to happen. And it first happened, I think, with DSTAR. And there were some painful moments along the way, I think. Some friction between people that want to be pure G2, the ICOM gateway, and people that want to do IRC-DDB or other versions like that. But I feel like we've grown through that. There's not the friction, I don't think, that used to be. You don't have to be one or the other. Like Jim said, you can be both. So it's really good to hear how that innovation is continuing. And our next speaker is one of those people that continues that. He's been on the hardware side. If you're on any of the Yahoo groups, you see his posts. He's been one of the pioneers with the IRC-DDB software and technology. And so it's really good to hear what he's doing, and I think he's going to share today something you might not have expected, but probably heard a little bit about. And so it's my pleasure to introduce John Hayes, and let's hear what he has to say. K7V, isn't it? I got it.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. So we're going to depart a little different direction here. I love Jim's presentation. One of the things you'll find about those of us that are in kind of the third-party DSTAR thing is we're kind of supportive of each other. If you want an Ambi chip with a microphone attached to it plugged into a USB port, I don't try to talk you out of it. I send you over to Jim, and he does the same for some of our things like CumDB. And that's good, and we're good friends with Hoos and Fred and the rest of the gang, Robin. So I really enjoy that. I like being in that mode. When I used to work in the computer industry for vendors and Open Systems started up, they coined a phrase called cooperation. We help each other, but we compete on our own merits, and that's where we would like to go with this. Anyway, so what I'm going to propose today is that there's another way to get a repeater up. Hotspots are great, unless you and your buddy want to talk to each other and you're across the hill from each other, because you can't hear each other, right? So it's great if you want to get in the network, but sometimes you just got to have a repeater. So a while ago, Yaesu decided to start selling a repeater called the DR1X. And they gave a few away at the beginning, some beta units, and then they made their product available on the marketplace. But they decided, well, let's get this out and people using it. So they came out with this great deal where you can buy a repeater. And one slide ahead of me because it's showing me two here. That's what it looks like. They offered it for $500. That included shipping and taxes. How many of you spent $500 on a mobile radio before? Okay, was it a dual band radio? That's a dual band repeater. You can put it on 2 meters, you can put it on 70 centimeters, whatever's available in your area. In most areas you can't get on 2 meters. How many of you are in an area where there's an open 2-meter repeater pair? I'm not, but I'm holding my hand up. How many of you are in an area where a 440 repeater pair is open? How many of you are in an area where a 430 is not utilized? You can put a repeater there. You have to respect that there are other activities there and put your repeater around them, but there's a place to put a repeater if you need to do it. And this repeater will go down into the 430 band. So I looked at that and I said, I'm going to buy one of those just to check them out, check out this new Fusion thing, see if it's worth playing with. And I took it and I turned this repeater around, and on the back there was a DE or HD15 connector that said accessory. And I looked at it, I pulled out the specs, and he said, you know, I've put other repeaters on D-Star before by hooking up GMSK modems. I can make this a D-Star repeater if it's clean. So I did. A little bit about the repeater. It's 100% duty cycle at 20 watts. That's a pretty decent repeater. You can set it at 5, 20, or 50 watts. If you're at 50 watts, do not connect to reflector 0 to 1 Charlotte. Particularly if you live in Phoenix. It has a built-in controller that does analog FM or narrow FM, which has an interesting characteristic. You can fit narrow FM in a 12.5 kilohertz channel. So if your UHF is filling up, you can take those 25 kilohertz channels and split them in two and put 2 repeaters in it. Okay? Digital fusion using the C4 FM modulation also takes up 12.5 kilohertz, and a D-Star takes up 6 1/4. So in a 12.5 kilohertz channel, you can run all three: analog, fusion digital, and D-Star. You can set it up for 2 meters to 70 centimeters, and I didn't know that Kenwood was actually going to make the mythical Kenwood D-Star radio available, and apparently you can see it under glass out there. So I didn't put it in my slides, but Bridgecom makes a really nice 220 repeater for $9.95 that with our device that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, you could make a 220 D-Star repeater. And 220 is a great band. We use it a lot in the Pacific Northwest up in the Seattle area. Has a touch screen to do the setup. I can take one out of the box, and if I have my duplexer pre-tuned, hook it up and be on the air in less than 15 minutes. All the configuration. Pretty nice. You can order it directly from Yaesu. If you know how to use a QR code, that'll take you right to the application to order one of these. If you're an individual, their program requires that you have a coordination or a coordination in progress. So you want to do that. If you're a club, you don't have to have a coordination. What do the FCC rules say a club must consist of? 4 people. It does not say they have to be hams. One of them should have a ham license so they can be the trustee for your repeater call center. How many of you have 4 people living in your house? Or have 3 friends? Now that's a stretch for some. So they've raised the price to, they went up 20% to $600. But this deal is still available today. You can go order one of these repeaters.
But no shirts. But no shirts. They were giving T-shirts away.
Yeah, I got them. They're sitting in a box somewhere. There's a couple requirements. You have to pay for it before they'll ship it to you. but the $600 covers the cost of the repeater, the tax, and the shipping. So it's $600 flat. You have to promise to put it on the air in the area where you said you'd put it on for 1 year. And you can't resell it for a year. All of mine are now a year or nearly a year old. I have 3 of them. Between me and my friends, we have about 7 of them. And there's the URL to go get the application if you'd like to apply for one. I am told by Chris Wilson they approve in the high 90% of people applying to these repeaters. So, 97, 98%, something like that. So, you got the repeater. You can run 2 antennas, separate feed line, and properly space them vertically and make a repeater. But a duplexer's nice. On a moderate to low RF environment, you can get away with one of the little flat pack UHF duplexers. I've done several repeaters with these. My repeaters don't tend to be where there are megawatt transmitters around them, so these little notch duplexers work well. I buy mine out of China. There's an eBay dealer there, Radio Shop 888. He will sell you one for approximately $100 pre-tuned to your frequency. So you don't even have to know how to tune a duplexer. And when I've gotten mine, and I also ordered my cables from them because it just comes in one package, the service has been great. I'm sure there are other ones out there. I like this one because it's 50 watts and 6 cavities, and you can get really good notches on it. I throw it on a Rigel spec analyzer with a tracking generator at home, and the notches are really good. I mean, when he tunes it, it's ready to go. And that's his radio shot there. So, if you look at my original lash up, it was, well, I started with the URI because I had one laying around. But you have to control a bunch of lines going into the repeater to say, quit worrying about fusion and analog and just do D-star. Oh, I'm done with D-star, go back, you can do those other modes. So I was running wires from pins on a Raspberry Pi, and I was using the URI to get the analog in and out of it. So we designed a little board. We call it the D-Star controller. Is our universal digital radio controller. It's a high-end sound chip. We do the modem and software. It has all of the control lines already mapped out to a high-density 15-pin connector, so you just do a straight-through cable from the repeater to this. It gets powered by the repeater. There's 13 volts on one of the pins. Has a regulator on it. We back 5 volts out of it into the Raspberry Pi and run the Raspberry Pi off the repeater as well. So there's only one cable. You don't have to have a separate power supply or anything. It does all the PTT. It does the repeater control. We have 4 modes that you can do. You can do analog plus D-Star. You can do digital fusion plus D-Star. You can do all 3. You can do just straight analog if you want. Not a lot of sense in doing that. Or D-Star all by itself. There's a little trick to doing that. But basically you now have a 3-mode repeater. Okay? Now, in some areas, some of you may belong to a club, but they have an old repeater that's held together with duct tape and baiting wire, and for $600 they might replace it, because the analog users will still be able to get on. So, I think this is a pretty good solution for that. Because it is a sound chip, we also added a DIN 6 connector on it, which you can plug into the packet port of most radios that have been built in the last 20 years, and run things like 9600 baud packet. I have a DARA sound modem running on one end in the booth, 9600 baud. We're doing APRS at 9600 instead of 1200. We have a network for that in the Seattle area too, so we tend to go higher speed on that. This is the same chip, if any of you have heard about our coming UDRX 440 radio, it's the same chip we'll use, and we'll be developing modems that go much higher speeds. Unfortunately, a lot of the radios out there will not, but the cross-leverage of modem development will work between the two devices. And so you'll have a lot of variety of things to do there. I'll just mention Bridgecom just came out with a 220 radio. I've mapped out the pins. We can hook it up for a 220 hotspot or for 220 packet or whatever you want to do. One nice thing about what Bridgecom did with the new 220 radio is they also included the 219 band. How many of you here know that we have a 219 ham band? Okay, it's data only, point to point. It's 1 megahertz, so it's a place to put traffic if your bands are busy. So the setup is pretty easy. You get the device, you plug it in, you install the latest Raspbian Jesse image from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. We have a script you run, it updates it, gives it a new kernel with our drivers and a few other files and touches and stuff. And it also changes the order by which packages are loaded, so when you load D-Star repeater from G4PALX, you get the one with the little fixes we put in, which we've sent back so they can eventually get into the main. Everything we're doing is open source, so you can go in and play with it and look at it. But initially, at least use our binaries because they work. The same thing with IRC gateway. And then you set the configuration and you're up and running in a short period of time. Again, if I have this preloaded on a UDRC Raspberry Pi combination and plug it on the repeater, it's up in about 2 minutes. So, not bad. It's available today. You can come by and see a demonstration. I actually have a repeater set up there. 440 plus 500. Key it up with your D-Star radio. Key it up with your Fusion Digital radio. Key it up with a PL of 123 on analog, and you can mix and match and have a good time and come over and see how that all works. And it's list price is $89.95, but we have a show special. We're going to charge you an extra nickel because we didn't want to carry nickels around, but we'll pay the sales tax, so you're actually better off. There's no shipping or sales tax with that. And as luck would have it, Raspbian changed the components of some of the crucial packages that go into a Raspbian install the beginning of the week. And so in order for future installs not to break, we needed to repackage our kernel stuff. That work's all done. We've done test installs, it all works. But we will be documenting how to install all of that in the coming week on our site. So, questions? Sir?
Yeah, so if I had the repeater set up the way that you described, and it will run all 3 modes, so if I make a transmission using a D-Star radio, someone else with an analog radio is going to hear the repeater and it's going to go shush, 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 buzz, 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 but another D-Star radio will receive my transmission. You know, and that's what you mean by that.
Yeah, so here's a couple of things that you need for your user base when you set it up this way.
Yeah.
And you have to do this if you got a digital signal on the frequency anyway. One of the worst things you can do is put digital and analog on the same channel. But everyone's going to do it, so let's open it up to some more things. So all of your analog users should use PL both on input and receive.
Okay.
Then they don't hear the swish, swish, swish.
Yeah.
And all of ICOM's D-Star radios created in the last 8 years or so, and all of the Fusion radios have this feature called busy channel lockout. You turn that on. If there's a signal that you don't hear on the repeater, you don't have to look at the meter. When you key the mic, it beeps at you to let you know the channel's busy, and then you wait until the channel's open and then transmit. So, and it doesn't transcode between any of those modes.
Yes, right.
You're talking D-star to D-star, you're talking analog to analog. You can actually go between Fusion, digital, and analog, but that's their controller doing it. We run an IRC-DVD gateway, which Jim mentioned in his presentation, on the same Raspberry Pi, or you can have it talk to one remotely, so you're fully integrated into the network. All the reflectors, call sign routing, all of those things are available.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So, in the back.
The lowest model Raspberry Pi.
Which model of Raspberry Pi?
You need a 3 or can it work with a 2?
It will work with a 2 or a 3. It must have a 40-pin header. If you have a 2 laying around, go ahead and use it. If you're going to buy a new one, you may as well buy a 3. They're a little more capable. Any other questions? Thank you for your attention.